So picture this, you've got an athlete who's just finished the game, maybe they're done with practice and there's something on their mind, something that maybe has been on their mind for a while and they want to talk to somebody about it. Maybe they're not interested in talking to one of their teammates, but we know a lot of student athletes really trust their coach. And so maybe they want to have that conversation with their coach, but they really just don't know how to start the conversation. They might want to talk about being homesick, or maybe that they've just found out that they've got a long-term injury. Or maybe it's related to substance abuse or academic concerns or other relationships in their life. They're just not necessarily sure on how they go about starting that conversation with their coach. Part of that is a culture of care in athletics. My name is Jeff Milroy, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about what a culture of care in athletics is. And we've got Stephen Hebard here with us today to tell us a little bit more about that. Stephen, can you tell us a little bit more about what culture of care is in athletics?
Yeah, I can. A culture of care in athletics is represented by an athletics program that's built on three specific factors. And those three things are relationships, communication, and human development. And what culture of care does is it provides us this framework for kind of understanding how to best support student athlete well-being, from policy and leadership, coaching behaviors, all the way down to the things that a student athlete can do themselves to create a supportive environment where they feel like they can get their needs met related to their well-being.
Okay, so you just brought up a few things, and I want to pull some stuff up here right now,
Sure.
and maybe you actually can walk us through a little bit. So you mentioned relationships, communication, and human development. Can you kind of maybe even use the situation or the student athlete that I started us off with here and talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so thinking about any student athlete that's really struggling with something and coming to a coach, for example, for help, they're in a place of probably feeling really vulnerable, not sure what their coach is going to say or how they'll respond, and maybe even concerned that the way that they do respond could impact their standing on the team. But with something like a strong relationship, for example, some of those questions go away and that vulnerability becomes a lot easier. So they're able to have these conversations that, could be really challenging, but they have this understanding that because of the coach-athlete relationship that they have, they're more likely to get their needs met and they feel that they're being supported well. When we look at communication, which is another piece of a culture of care in athletics, there are different types of communication that are more supportive than others. Sometimes we communicate to each other without a lot of empathy, and we don't even mean to. But by knowing the ways that we can communicate and to communicate support, to communicate kindness, to communicate help, by having some of those skills as a student athlete, as a coach, as an administrator, we can be more successful in supporting the well-being of athletes. The last piece here is human development, and I think this is a kind of a tough one sometimes, and one that gets skipped over. I know student athletes, their coaches, their programs, they all have one thing in mind typically, and that is optimal performance and winning. And one of the things that we have to remember is that in support of optimal performance and winning, we also need to be thinking about the fact that these student athletes are developing human beings, and their health and their growth are really important. And there are responsibility as supporters, as mentors, as coaches and leaders of these student athletes. So together, looking at these three things, it starts to create this environment where student athletes can begin to thrive.
Okay, so it's all, it's coming together a lot more for me too, and with my own understanding, my background. So you mentioned a few things here in addition to, communication, relationships, human development, but this idea of kind of a top-down or a bottom-up approach to this. So I never like to say that the student athletes are the only ones that can do something about this. So I want to go to another slide, and I want you to, walk us through this one a little bit, because it seems like it's a little bit more complicated if we think about, what's all at play in this culture of care.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get sort of boxed in thinking that we just need to train student athletes to do something differently, or maybe just coaches need to be educated or something like that. But and those things are important, but it goes beyond that because, at high level, at the university level, and also at sort of the high level of the athletics program, there are decisions being made all the time that influence and impact everyone around them and everything around them. And ultimately that ends up landing on the student athlete in some way. So when we think about those three factors of relationships, of communication, and of human development, athletics programs need to be thinking about these pieces when they're developing policy. And one of the things, or one of the examples that I think of right off the top of my head is thinking about discipline in athletics. And we understand that discipline is used to try and ward off negative behaviors, unhealthy behaviors sometimes, behaviors that we don't want student athletes to participate in. But we also have to think about the flip side of that, is that there are consequences that come from those policies that maybe have an impact on relationships, on communication, and on human development. So just even at the policy level, it's important to be thinking about the impact on a culture of care. Coming down from there, even at the administrator level, who maybe don't have as many opportunities to interact with a student athlete, developing trust with the coaches and athletic staff around you, developing trust with student athletes, becoming a familiar face, and again, doing what you can to build in opportunities to grow relationships, to foster positive, empathic communication. And remember that the purpose, again, in addition to optimal performance, is the growth and human development of your student athletes. When those things are also considered, again, where you're from all these different angles, creating a space for student athletes to have a greater well-being.
That's awesome. I think you're really starting to, pull it all together in terms of, how it's developed, who's a really key stakeholder in its development, and speaking of specifically culture of care and athletics. Now, if I'm sitting back and I'm an athletic administrator, or maybe I'm a coach and I'm listening to you talk about this right now, I really want to understand a little bit more about, okay, what are some of the more, really immediate benefits and maybe long-term benefits of a culture of care, or a strong culture of care in athletics. And so we'll go on to this next slide that has a few of those. And maybe if you want to just pick out one or two that you can really highlight, and then we can talk a little bit more about some of those more long-term benefits of a strong culture of care.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I like to think about the pieces on this slide, these individual, relational, and managerial pieces, is that they're really based in leadership behaviors. So when you have a culture of care and the leadership behaviors align with these pieces, then your student athletes feel safer. They feel like they belong to a team. They feel like they belong to an entire athletics program that gets them and that they belong to. And I can imagine that you, as an administrator, as a coach, or as somebody who is a part of an athletics program, you're feeling like you belong in that athletics program is meaningful to you. Mentorship and nurturing, to me, I think a culture of care that really truly supports student athletes is one where there are people that are willing to and want to be guides, and there are student athletes that are there and want to be guided. And again, growth is encouraged and everyone's striving for growth. So there are these really, I think, sort of fundamental and honestly kind of basic pieces that I think that are they're sort of low-hanging fruit, and they're there, but it requires intentionality. Intentionality again in fostering strong relationships and learning how to and when to communicate, and again, how to prioritize human development.
That's awesome. And then obviously we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier that, there may be some of these more short-term outcomes, but there's obviously some maybe much more strong or powerful long-term benefits of culture of care as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. When a culture of care is sustained over time, so again, when it just becomes the norm that there are strong relationships and that people care about the way that they communicate one another, and that the whole athlete is considered when decisions are being made and when there are conversations, over time, people just begin to trust the environment around them, and they're more willing to act in vulnerable ways and honest ways, and really be real about their experience. And, when athletes, when coaches, when administrators all can be really real in their experience, it's pretty amazing the things that can happen. People feel included, people that are typically maybe feel different or feel like they don't belong start to see that there's a space for them because people are willing to, and they get used to people reaching out to them and helping them. The last bullet here I think is a really important one too. There's a lot of education that happens. It's required in a lot of athletics programs, right? But without a culture of care, it's hard for that education to really settle in and be meaningful. And one of the things that we talk about when we talk about culture of care is that when we've got an entire athletics program, a team of leaders and coaches and student athletes that are all on the same page, these educational opportunities, they all seem to sort of sink in and take hold a little bit better or a little bit stronger than in other sorts of environments.
That's awesome. This has been really helpful. I know some folks that would be, are watching right now or maybe just getting exposed to this for the first time. And so, we didn't want this kind of introduction to be too long. And I really appreciate you, Stephen, being able to talk us through a little bit. And so what the goal is here is that, ultimately through the Athlete Wellbeing Network is we're going to start providing more opportunities for folks to start developing that culture of care wherever they are. I'm sure there's some folks that are listening and seeing some of these benefits and saying, well, how do I start doing that on my own campus? What can I do? And so that's what we're going to start doing is providing some resources and some educational material for people to, really kind of sink their teeth into and really start playing an active role, like you say, within their athletics department to start creating a really strong culture of care where it allows for those relationships to grow and for that human development to occur. So we really appreciate that. And so everybody who's watching, keep your eyes out in the Athlete Wellness Network for more resources related to developing a culture of care.